Do you feel trapped in the whirlwind of modern life, sacrificing your health and happiness for the sake of work? Our guest today will show you how treasured self-care wisdom from Korea can help change all of that and have you living a healthier and more fulfilling life. She's an award-winning eco-entrepreneur, CEO, and author who spent 16 years living in Asia as a Korean American from New York City. This is the story of Sun and Ssukgat with Michelle Youngman Bang. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Listen, the book was fascinating. And before I even jump into it, I mean, there is a personal journey that kind of led you into this book and a little bit of a health crisis that you experienced. Can we start there, even before you started the book, what your journey was to get to here?
Yeah, and I'll give a little bit of my background because I think that's important too. I'm
Please.
a Korean American. I did spend 16 years in Hong Kong, but I'm still splitting my time with my family between Hong Kong and New York. And originally, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, so I very much represent East and West worlds, which lent a lot of perspective in writing the book. I'm also a social impact entrepreneur. I'm a Harvard Business School graduate, and I trained in functional foods and on holistic preventative care, which extends into healthy aging and mother-baby care. I'm a mother of two children. But I also, like you, Casper, I grew up in a world of East-West medicine. My father is a US-based doctor trained at a top medical school in Korea. Something like 0.8% acceptance rate. So I very much take a cue in the way he practices medicine, and I was exposed to a lot of that when I was growing up. So, exposed to the practical and holistic applications of medicine, which are actually deeply embedded within Korean culture, using whole foods and holistic measures to recover from surgeries, from colds and pregnancies and injuries. So this is very much, normalized in our culture, but I didn't really think about it until I started my own journey. And then later I married into a traditional Chinese family that really embodied these nourishing traditions passed down generationally. So I kind of took all of that, as I was living in Hong Kong. And at the time that I started my journey before the book, I actually didn't intend to write a book. I kind of went through a personal experience. I was sick for the first time in my life. I had launched a dream social impact startup that experienced tremendous growth. It was winning a lot of awards, and I was really deeply impassioned about, my team, the mission. I was raising a family also, and I was working around the clock, sort of, I think I had trained myself over the years, just focus on the goal, focus on finishing. I was really too busy to sleep at the time, too busy to eat. I was running on black coffee, running a team across, the world, in different time zones. And in the middle of all of that success, I landed in the emergency room for the first time in my life. And it wasn't really that. I mean, it was sort of a brief acute episode. The doctors put a camera down my throat into my stomach. They did discover that there was very little of my gut lining that remained healthy. But I think that the major impact was that when I returned home from the hospital, I suddenly became ill all of the time. And, this is coming from a person who really had a cold. I was really, I sort of prided myself on my strength and my vitality. And I just kept pushing through, a lot of the aches and pains that I normally would experience, when I needed to work. And, seeing that my gut lining was so compromised, I just kind of realized that this health problem had been brewing underneath the surface for a really long time. It was sort of like, if you picture an iceberg, I was sort of the picture of health on the outside, the tip that was exposed above the surface, but, beneath, hidden, the roots of my foundations had all fallen away. And, by the time I landed in the hospital, my body was sort of screaming that I needed to do something to make it better. So a few things happened simultaneously. I came from the hospital. My husband started cooking me things that he had learned from his grandmothers, from grandparents actually, and his parents, healing recovery foods that were, very I would say basic and classic in his culture. You know, there's things that people really understand and really they participate in the Asian culture, especially if you go into Asia. And it started reminding me about a lot of the things that my own family had done for me when I was ill, especially my father, who liked to cook a very specific chicken soup for me. I think every culture has their chicken soup, but this one was, sort of special the way he, cooked the broth, and I can explain that later. But it started helping me to go down the path of connecting the dots of the wisdom that I had grown up with. And then I started realizing, wow, I actually live on a continent that breeds another way of life that's sort of presenting me with another narrative of what older age might be. So, for example, as I was, ill and started recovering, I was walking around Hong Kong and realizing just the average person, well over 50, wrinkle free, a lot of energy and doing activities that we reserve for the young, like going into the public park and doing chin ups, and just really a lot stronger than I was. Or, they'll go exercise with a huge sword or go, dive into the deep ocean, go hiking. And it just reminded me that, I was in a place and time where I could actually go and ask people. So I just started casually interviewing people, asking them, what do you do to stay well? And as I was going down the rabbit hole, it just led to, things that I wanted to explore on my own. So I started realizing that, Asia is a longevity hub. And then I went through China, through Japan, through Korea, all of the different Asian countries, and started, developing my own personal perspective of what, the patterns I was seeing were. And then I also trained, in a formal way to take a look at nutrition and preventative care measures. So it ended up landing into a book because I started realizing that a lot of this wisdom was fading away in our modern world. I think, in modern medicine, sometimes we choose one or the other, which is, there's a cohort, that goes straight to the pill. They're very much into the new science. And then there's, sometimes, the holistic part of it. They're sort of, within their old world. But I kind of think the way forward is really kind of meshing both of them together. It's, embracing the new science, but also preserving the wisdom. So I really, with this book, I wanted to preserve the wisdom, as we move forward with science. And it was a way for me to kind of, write a little love letter to my Korean heritage, which I felt like I lost. I lost the identity as I was growing up. My family worked so hard to assimilate into the American culture, working very hard to, conquer the English language. Even my grandparents were teaching English, in the senior citizens' homes. And so they did a really good job of assimilating into American culture. But I think along the way, I just sort of, forgot about my own heritage. And so even, in writing the book, I started using my middle name, Jungmin, which I hadn't when I was growing up. So it was just a lot of different things that I wanted to achieve in the book. And then, as always with all of my work, it's very important for me to be part of the social impact fabric of the world, anything that I do. So there is actually a social impact mission behind the book. Um, the World Health Organization actually estimates that 70% of chronic illnesses can be preventable with lifestyle changes. And I think that's incredible. I think that's something that we can actually all work on, very easily. I feel like that's sort of the radical transformation. I thought that it used to be really hard, that it was very overwhelming. And the other thing too is that, when we preserve the old wisdom, we can actually be a lot more environmentally friendly in so many ways, stemming food waste and also, being more plant diverse. We have over 300,000 edible plants in the world that we can benefit from. But, Americans tend to focus on three major crops: wheat, rice, corn. And, as a result, we're actually depleting our soil. These plants are becoming extinct. And so I think there's a lot of things we can do as individuals to make a change for the better. And so the book was born.
Yeah, no, it really, really resonated with me on multiple levels. Even that fact, I am a first generation born here, son of immigrants that came from Poland. And that too, I remember that they wanted to assimilate and have me be I was born in New York myself, on the Upper East Side, Lenox Hill Hospital, and I remember that there was this challenge of how do I, continue my culture. I was sent to Polish school, but still wanted to, embrace Americanization. And it's very difficult to have that balance and carry. But what I found is that through my parents preserving, allowing me to be Americanized, but preserving still the identity that I had, the connection, I could lean back on it. I find a lot of people can't lean back because they don't even know, what it may be that is back in their culture. And to
Mhm.
be able to go there to live so long, 16 years in that culture and take that, I found that was kind of like your healing process was actually reconnecting, right? We all say reconnect with nature, but I also say reconnect with your heritage, your history, right? And that's so important. That's what came out of the book. And in those 16 years, you offer a lot from the Asian culture, especially the Korean culture. And I mean, let's just start with, one of your first chapters is that Buddhist nuns and the microbiome, right? And how you learned from an ancient way, something that we are again bringing forward into science, the understanding of how important your microbiome is and everything from your mood to all types of chronic diseases. So can you start there with what did you learn in your journey from Buddhist nuns in correlation to the microbiome?
Yeah, and I think, what you're saying is correct. The new science is actually catching up with the old wisdom.
It is, yeah.
I think, when you watch the Buddhist nuns and you're learning from them, they're not, they're, I think it's all now being connected together. I don't think they were sort of living in, akin with the environment, but, I think now we're starting to put the science attached to it. So I so after I started observing things, in Hong Kong, as I was doing some research, I found a cohort of Buddhist nuns that were living in the mountains of Korea. One of them is really famous. She appeared on Netflix, Chef's Table, and she does something called temple food, which is, cooking a very traditional way in Korean cuisine. And it's using organic, well, really ingredients that she's foraging from the forest, or growing in sort of her messy little garden. And it's using that, and also pairing that with fermented condiments. And there's a ton of ferments that they use in their traditional cuisine. The other thing too is that it becomes this very, spiritual practice for them. So they really feel like they're growing the plants and then they're kind of putting it inside them, and that becomes part of the medicine of it all. What they're practicing is something called yakshik dongwon. It's sounds like a complicated Korean word, but it means food is medicine. And it's not necessarily really about food, although food is really important. It's really a philosophy of a more preventative and proactive approach to health. And I think it's, something that we often dismiss or we forget, just like I did when I landed in the hospital as a first step. And it dates back to ancient times. The Korean Buddhist nuns, actually, a lot of them retired from the royal kitchens. And there was a lot, if you look back into the dossiers of these royal kingdoms, a lot was done to promote the longevity of the kings and their royal families. And so they would have these elaborate feasts with hundreds of dishes. And if you look at, Korean panchan is little side dishes. There's tiny little bowls, on a table, and they all contained roots and different produce and protein. And they're all sort of very seasoned with these fermented condiments, which lends an umami flavor to it. But yakshik dongwon is a fundamental belief that healthcare starts with what you eat, with nutritious foods, and then secondarily with more advanced medical treatments if there's no improvement. So, in Korea, this is very different than what happens in the US. I have had two children. After you have babies, for example, you will spend, you have it's a very normalized procedure where have a dedicated month to have the body recover, especially if you're focused on breastfeeding or, just kind of caring for the baby. They have a lot of different types of dishes that they are providing for the mother, like seaweeds. I mean, I was having a seaweed Korean soup straight out of the hospital when I gave birth to my firstborn. So it just really, Yachidoman dates back to the ancient times. It also represents terrain-based living. It's about building the resilience of your body. So it kind of terrain-based living, I feel like is very much, it's like when you look at that versus germ theory, because I grew up with germ theory, I was really afraid of germs and I was always kind of washing my hands really antiseptic and afraid of touching dirt because I always thought that that would cause disease. But terrain-based theory is about really what the nuns do. They are going outside, being in touch with dirt, they're being in touch with nature and eating this way, and they're building the resilience, the soil of their body so that they're stronger when they're exposed to the germs.
Yeah, no, I loved seeing that you had terrain theory in the book because it is so essential that we start to realize and start to move away maybe from a pure pasteur look of the world that we have to be over sanitized. And you even brought it up when you're talking about zero waste. You know, a lot of the fruits we see in our Whole Foods and everywhere almost look perfect. They
Mhm.
look, almost shined up and they have no blemishes and the ones that do, we usually stay away from, right? When in reality, those offer many benefits over the ones that may be so polished, and some of them may be non-organic. That's how they look the way they do, and have lots of pesticides and other things on them. Can you go into how the not just the terrain theory itself helps model that, but this idea of utilizing all fruits, even the ones that have blemishes, going more towards a zero waste approach is actually a healthier one for us and the world?
Yeah, I think anyone can sort of go back into the food data. There's a
Yeah.
lot of statistics, you can look at the calories, you can look at, the nutrients that are provided. So, even going into the U.S. government's, they have all of these statistics. So if you take a look, compare an apple versus an apple with a peel, and then
Mhm.
you can compare them with different types of apples or different types of fruits, you start seeing that you will significantly increase your nutrient load by just eating the peel. So that's something that I very much promote now, when I'm eating or, if I'm feeding something to my family, I am not, taking away the peel because it serves a lot of purposes. One, increases the nutrients that you're eating, but two, and the fiber, but it also stems food waste. I think, we produce food and a lot of it's actually thrown away. And 50% of that waste actually happens in our home because we do things like peeling the fruit and throwing that away, but when it in fact is actually edible and really good for us. So in Korean culture, they do something, what I call the whole plant. So, a long time ago, we knew, and we're so far away from food now because when we go into a supermarket, it's packaged, it's very disconnected to, what the actual fruit or food might have looked like. Like if you take a look at a ketchup bottle, for example, a lot of kids might not know that that is actually from tomatoes. But a long time ago, they would grow things and know how long it took, and then they would really want to use the entire plant. So the whole plant is really, using the plant from flower to root, and then also the peel. And it's just so much better for you, so much better for your gut, and also you're stemming food waste.
Yeah. And it's something you see again in traveling and going to different places. Because when you go to places like Asia, you're going to see a lot more markets. You're going to see things that are seasonal because you can't have everything all year round like we're accustomed to. And you're going to pick up that there is a lot of the ideas behind cooking, and the cuisine itself is utilizing more of the whole, whatever it is that you're using, whether it's animal or vegetables and plants. But I think isn't like a big part of that also the relationship in cooking? We're not cooking, we're not preparing foods as much anymore. So we totally are, we just buy something in a plastic thing, consume it, and go on our day, usually in a stressed environment, quick. You know it. You've been the entrepreneur life in New York City. I've been there too. It's just time is money, right? Sort of approach. Why would you cook when you have all these wonderful places in New York City to go to? But if you go back a little bit to the traditional way of doing things in Asian culture and most cultures, cooking is such a big staple of that and part of what connects you to food and leaves you in a healthier state.
Yeah, and I think, it doesn't have to be complicated too. That was what was so encouraging to me. I went to go visit centenarians, across these Asian countries. It's not this artisanal type plate that you're
Right.
seeing on Instagram. It's something much more simple than that. And in fact, when you start preparing, I mean, and I always tell, people who I'm talking to about this, even if you don't like cooking, try to prepare it once just to understand what ingredients are needed, what their role is in the dish, but also what is not needed. And then it really informs you when you go into a supermarket, to take a look at what the ingredient list is, what is provided. And, there's a lot of things that are, preserving shelf life, things that food coloring, things that we might not, we don't need. I think the the simple preparation of it all was really encouraging for me because, I started out in this process actually not cooking at all. It was
Right.
really my husband who was like more of the gourmet chef. And, I think what I found was that a lot of times, even like sort of the simple preparation is actually healthier. So, if you think about like, I used to not cook and just eat like 100% raw diet. And sometimes, for a lot of people, that's, not easy to digest. So I kind of mix it now between raw and cooked. So cooking actually, it helps to break down the plant walls, but you don't want to cook it so long that you want to retain their nutrients as much as possible. So if you're thinking about a quick saute, quick blanching, quick boiling for a few seconds just to help you break down the wall a little bit to help you digest, that's very, very simple. And then on top of that, if you just add the Korean foundational ingredients like the sesame oil, the traditionally brewed soy sauce, you're adding flavor, and then it's as easy as that.
Yeah, and one of the things I found really cool about the book is you're introducing people to a lot of these very simple ingredients to add in. One of them I found, that was, stuck out a bit was vinegar. There are multiple types of vinegar because everyone just used the ACV, apple cider vinegar, take a shot in the morning or something, that's it. And I don't think many people utilize it more so. They think of vinegar as a cleaning product, maybe white vinegar, right? But you were listing, the uses of it in multiple type. I think there was a persimmons type vinegar, and other ones that were like, oh, wow, that's pretty interesting. Talk about that and kind of what you learned about the usage of things, even like vinegar in cooking and helping to stay healthy.
So I grew up with something called naengmyeon. It's a cold soup with noodles, and I didn't really think about it. They put vinegar inside the soup with hot mustard. It not only increases flavor, but it helps for you to, the digestibility of the noodles, but it also increases your metabolism, helps with weight loss, weight management. And there's a lot of little things that are, have a twofold. It increases the flavor profile, but it's also boosting health. And they were sort of things that I was doing, as a child, but I didn't really think about it, And so apple versus, persimmons, I feel like a lot more literature has been written about apples and persimmons, you might not come across as much, but when you start taking a look at it into the data again, persimmons are, they have a lot more antioxidants. So I started switching my vinegar, and I have a lot of different types of vinegars that I use now. I really enjoy them. But I now specifically use persimmon vinegar because I like the flavor. It's very mild. I can put it into like hot water if I wanted to, and that will increase my metabolism in the morning or before a meal. It's a much more mild flavor, and I know it has a lot more antioxidants. I also use black vinegar, which is
Mhm.
it's very key in Chinese cuisine. And they all have different flavors, but they're all really, increasing your metabolism, especially before a meal. I think that has really helped me. That including the probiotic rich Sauerkraut and the kimchi before a meal, I think really helps to prepare my gut before I tuck in.
Now, let me ask you this because everything I read in there seems really like a general healthy type of diet, but it is cultural. And, I even look at it from a Slavic Polish background of, oh, wow, I've never heard of this stuff. Would it apply to my type? Because I always like to think of there is no perfect diet out there for everyone, right? You have to understand understand some of your genetics and, cultural background, and eat accordingly. This is why some people say the Mediterranean diet is very good, but I think that's very good from people in a Mediterranean background. Do you feel that the Korean cuisine and a lot of the different recipes you're giving are universally accepted regardless of the background?
I think if you strip it back down to the principles, it really applies to any culture.
Yeah.
Um, well, I think it's interesting because, when I was living in Asia, some of the ingredients were really easy to access, but then when I was living in New York City, it just became a lot harder. So, I think if you wanted to apply and learn about certain ingredients, there's always the dried format, which is such a beauty of a thing because it not only lasts longer, sometimes, they flash freeze it in a way that, is at its perfect state. And I just keep it in the freezer if I wanted to, use it in a recipe. But I think it's the ideas are there. It's just sort of the idea of trying different kinds of plants that you might find. Like even if you go to a supermarket, if you kind of liken yourself as a forager in a supermarket, and start going beyond your palate. Like I used to just have broccoli, which is actually one of the, I think it's still the number one green vegetable in America. I think you can go beyond that and try different things. Bring one home every week, one different thing, even a fruit. I think of fruits are often taken, removed from diets because of their, sugar content. But in Asian culture, it's very, very important and also revered. They're given as gifts. So I think it's just I think even if you weren't able to find like a lychee fruit, which is, important in Asian culture, like taking the principle and sort of applying it to let me try a different fruit in the supermarket, you're still employing the same principle.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because I think the more and more we look at these kind of trending diets, let's say carnivore, keto, you start to strip back a lot of the foods there, right? You start to really limit things. And I think there's something to be said about an elimination diet if you truly have GI issues starting to see and rebuild it. But I also think there's a beauty in diversification and kind of seeing everything nature provides us as positive, net positive, and kind of seeing how we can include it rather than eliminate it. You know,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
talk about that because I just feel like the trends of, carnivore MD and all these are like just steak, no fruits, no this. It's like that seems incredibly limited for what we see in nature and what I read in your book, which is, robust and different colors and all these things you could incorporate to be healthier.
Yeah, I think the approach that I take is a very sort of naturalist
Yeah.
approach. I I would I think about the way they used to live, just sort of, taking from, living symbiotically with the land and what it can provide and kind of giving back as well. I think, going back to the word it for me, it's really not about following a single prescriptive eating plan for health. It's not about avoiding certain food groups. I mean, of course, like you said, sometimes you get into a health situation where you do need to, you need to restrict certain things. And I certainly had to do that as well when I was repairing my gut.
Mhm.
Um, More from the perspective of was there something that was irritating it and I needed to take a break for a little while. But after my gut healed and I was able to sort of implement them all back and now I can eat everything. But it really isn't about this sort of overwhelming, restrictive health procedure. I'm kind of an example. I used to work out really hard, run a lot, and now that I actually employ a lot of these methods that are in the book, I've never felt better, and it's so much for me. It's like radically simple, and that in it of itself has really transformed my life.
Yeah, I do think that we try to make things more complex than they need to be. And I do think sometimes we can look to our history and look behind us a bit to understand things better. And that's a big key part of this book. And when you looked at both Korean and Chinese and Japanese, all these, long living longevity nations, basically, I think you saw also some pieces in there beyond just the diet, a culture that walks a lot more, a culture that connects to others, right? Um, but I wanted to also ask because it seems that the stress is a big part of modern day living. As you say, New York City, entrepreneur type of lifestyle, it's high stress. Did you pick up on that in places like Hong Kong and others where you live? Was the stress not there, or was it just balanced better?
I think that stress is not necessarily bad, to be honest. I think
Yeah.
there can use it to kind of, you're using the adrenaline that's coming with it to push to a goal. I think where it becomes sort of really bad for your health is when it becomes really chronic and
Hmm.
to, inflammation, to disease. What is interesting about, places like Hong Kong, and I'm not saying, there's any place that's perfect in the world, but in the offices, like you'll see these office buildings are right next to it. And the same with Korea. Um, there are hiking paths right next to it. So that's what they're doing during their lunch breaks. So in Seoul, for example, there are all of these red clay paths. You are meant to take off your shoes and have your bare feet on the ground. It's right next to an office. And, it just encourages you to be outside, take steps. And steps is really a big part of it. Stanford actually did a study. They were looking at, the Apple Watch steps, across the world, and they saw that, at that particular time, Hong Kong had the highest number of steps at, close to 7,000 steps per day. I now do that every day, and you can take steps. It's, walking outside is great, but you can take steps, anywhere inside the house when you're cleaning. You can take steps like um, getting out, a stop earlier on the subway or taking the stairs instead of an elevator. So, going back to what you're saying, I think it's just sort of ingrained that they're moving all the time. We're like living in this modern culture where we're kind of sitting down and like very focused on computer work, the 24/7 digital culture. And I think that in and of itself is very stressful. So it's really important that you take breaks and being out in nature, the way it's embedded in their city, even in their cities, is a way that they're managing stress.
Yeah, in visiting, Seoul and Tokyo and even Shanghai, I noticed that number one, you don't see many obese people. You see people always walking around. You see them also. There was this, I saw this in Tokyo beautifully because I was walking around with like a Starbucks cup. There was no, trash out there. And suddenly I caught myself being the only one. They finished their meals inside, everything, right? In the area. So they have dedicated areas for like walking or doing things. They have dedicated areas for eating and they eat in peace, usually not running around checking their phone. I found that fascinating because we blur those lines completely. People are on the run eating healthy food, right? They think vegan like wrap and everything while they're running to the subway. There's garbage on the floor, which you didn't see in these countries in Asia. And I started to be like, wow, I wonder if we could do this. Do you feel we could bring those types of practices to you? Do you feel like New York City can get there? Because I'd
Oh my
love that.
I mean, there's a Korean word called jung, and it's a really complex word in Korea. And again, it's deeply embedded in culture. It's actually spawned this entire vocabulary from that base word, but it means a lot of different English words like love, compassion, generosity of spirit. But it's this whole idea of community and relationships. So, going back to, what you were saying, no garbage, the environment they've gone to zero waste in South
Yeah.
Korea. And it's because they care so much about each other that they care for their environment. I mean, it's like it extends even to strangers. So I think there's so many things that we can actually take back and, pretty simply. And, when you look at some of the research that's actually coming out, there is a long standing one, an 85-year study from Harvard that talks about relationships being, sort of the number one like longevity factor, over any other lifestyle change. And, that actually came through in a lot of the research that I found in Korea as well. But yeah, I think a lot of it's community and environment is just kind of I think there's easy things that we can do to take back here to New York City.
Yeah, it seems like, when you brought up this idea of self-care, there's self-love. Where there's self-love, you have love for others then because you have that capacity to do that. And you start building those connections, and then you start doing things that are better for everyone, for yourselves, for the environment, right? So you start looking at things like waste when you have that self-love. I've always said the best eco warriors out there are the ones that put their health first, because then I will not make the conscious decision to buy more plastic and just throw it away. I will not make that conscious decision to just throw everything in the garbage, rather compost some things or utilize them, freeze them, whatever it is. So it seems that, in the Asian culture, the Korean culture, there is this pride in themselves and their own care, correct? That I believe we can try and look to and revere in some ways and bring over, because obviously there is some issues in America with that, with our health in general. Just start there. Even, negating all the pollution and garbage and waste and everything. Maybe we just start with the health factor. Is it your kind of hope and ambition that, some of these principles that you see in Asian countries and Korea especially get brought into the American sphere of things and start to emulate that and then improve our health and therefore improve the environment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, one of the biggest things, actually, the reason why I wanted to use the word self-care in the subtitle of the book is I think there needs to be a redefining of what self-care is. I think in the modern construct, it's turned so much into external beauty. But it
Yes.
really is about your well-being, your internal well-being, that kind of has, external, consequences. You will be healthier and, sometimes the output is your skin is a lot healthier and it looks, more radiant. But I think, we can actually take a much more proactive approach. I mean, I think as individuals, we have so much more power to have a weight into what happens in our future, for ourselves, for our health, and also for the planet.
Yeah, it's a prioritization of kind of health as everything else goes well, and understanding that health isn't that, like you said, self-care, treat yourself weekend where you just go once a year to a spa and spend a lot of money on a massage. It's the daily choices, correct, that we make that are just small individual choices over and over that really reflect in our health. And that itself is self-care.
Absolutely.
Now, you ended the book on this idea of passing traditions on. So
Yes.
many of us nowadays kind of look to what's the shiny object in the room as the thing to look forward to, whether it's peptides or new supplements and new drugs and vaccines that'll be anti-cancer, instead of looking backwards maybe into the culture we've learned and passing on. How can we cultivate that, especially in a place where I think even in Asia, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, you're starting to lose that with the digital world and younger generation. They're almost rebelling against the wisdom of elders and saying we know the way with AI, with our social media, with content creation. How do we start to change that around and truly pass traditions on?
I think the first step is what the Korean Buddhist nuns do. They're being mindful,
Mm,
even just sort of the gratitude that they demonstrate towards the food that's in front of them. So going back to what you're saying, we are in this 24/7 digital culture where there's things streaming in front of us all the time, and it makes us mindless. We're not thinking about what we're doing. It's just like we're being presented with something all the time. So I think even just taking sort of the intentional break. Now actually one of my biggest practices is because I tend to work a lot. I still do because I still want to achieve a lot of things, but I know I have to take time to sort of take care of myself. So I will step away from the computer probably like every half hour or yeah, probably half hour and just take a few seconds to breathe. And it
Mm.
kind of like I breathe in 2 seconds, I pause, breathe out for, double amount the time. And it relaxes me. So it kind of de-stresses, provides more oxygen, but it also provides me with that moment of intentionality. What am I going to do next? And I think if we take that approach for everything that we do throughout the day, because we make a million decisions throughout the day, I think we'll be so much better for it.
Would you recommend people who maybe don't have such a lineage or ability to pass traditions on, meaning they've been Americanized for a long time and, don't really lean back on any different cultures or anything? Would you recommend that people just travel more and observe different cultures then if they can't connect to one themselves?
I think that there's so much to learn from different cultures. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like even just within Asia, they're so different. They have different weather patterns, they have different produce, there's different traditions for each of them. There might be things that, overlap, but they're all very special in their own way and they all have their own wisdom. So I was able to reconnect with my Korean heritage, but every tradition, every culture has their own wisdom as well. And I think traveling and seeing for yourself what and kind of wrapping your own mind and perspective around it, I think is really important. I think that one of the examples is that I had always heard of these stories of people kind of like reversing their chronic illnesses, and you sort of want to see it for yourself. It's like hearing about the Sistine Chapel but then not really seeing it. You see it for yourself and then it becomes so much more powerful. Like you are actually, I started incorporating a lot of things after seeing it with my own eyes. It just, yeah, it changes you a lot to travel and to see it for yourself.
Well, that's the thing. It's like I think we rely so much on just data and evidence without experience these days, right? We lean into what's on our phones as that has to be the truth of it, or maybe, instead of actually going out and experiencing now. And that's the one thing I always said I was blessed to be able to travel when I was young. It just opened my mind up to what else is out there. But it also made me insanely grateful to be where I am in the world, right? To be able to grow up in America is a blessing in itself when you go to these other places and you see how others live in sometimes poverty-stricken areas, that you start to have this attitude of gratitude really when you travel. So even if you don't connect with the cultures, and you could always get something out of, anywhere you go. And if anything, it's that attitude of gratitude. Do you feel that the Korean culture has that type of gratefulness, embedded in that? Or is that something that it really has to be kind of taught along the way and held in revere because it's not just something that comes naturally sometimes.
I think it's definitely embedded in the culture and
Yeah.
it goes back to family,
Yeah.
respect for family. There's always like a lot of people that I know in Korean culture, they go back on their birthdays and they're so grateful for their parents for giving them life. There's actually a soup. It's miyeokguk soup, and it's a seaweed soup, and it's for your birthday, and it's this way, in sort of a tangible form of being grateful for your lineage, and when you go to Korea, there's actually holidays that are, respecting grandparents, respecting the children and the parents, the family is very much a part of that. And I think that goes back to gratitude and, who gave you life.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's the nuclear family and just that valuing of family is really important, right? And I think that's what a lot of cultures you can always gain something from in putting that, first. One of the stories that stuck out and made me laugh a little bit in there was your internship at Samsung. And and the fact that when you walk into the office, you take off your shoes and you put on like slippers, right? Or Adidas slide-ons, right? And you have these executives probably in very nice three-piece suits with slippers on in meetings. Is
Yeah.
that something you still utilize wherever you are, the idea of taking off your shoes when you enter into a place?
In my own home, I do take off my shoes.
Yeah.
It's just something that I grew up with, but I was so taken aback that they actually do that in the office as well.
Right? Yeah.
Just-
It's one thing in a home, but it's another thing to make that a sacred space also in an office space where you have, your janitors cleaning every day and things like that. But I think it is kind of a wonderful practice because, you walk around, you bring a lot of things in with you step in and it's something I influenced myself. Obviously, I didn't do that growing up as much. As the American way of just run in with your muddy shoes and someone will clean after that. But it is something I do look at now and kind of value more and more. And those are the kind of things where you're an observer of other cultures, you could bring in those and just question. Yeah, I've been standing out there with all types of stuff, and I'm bringing that into a place where sometimes I lay on the floor, or, play around and their children and things like that. Do you feel that we will see New York City, offices start lining up slippers very soon when you walk in? Is that something that we can bring over here? Or
Um,
is that an Asian practice?
It stems from, a tradition where, they would eat and sleep on the floor. The floors were really, an important aspect of the home because it became the source of heat. So they
Mm.
would employ, the heat from the stoves and then it would run all the way through into the bedrooms. And it was just a really smart way of like kind of flowing the heat that was already being generated from cooking into, where they were sleeping. And, I think we can take a lot of things from different cultures and gain ideas. Like the American architect Frank Lloyd Wright, he went to Korea, saw the ondols, that's the heated floor that I was talking about, and he started putting that into his own home. Taking off his shoes and putting that into his own buildings. And so, yeah, I think we can all sort of think about that. There are a lot of people, when I was working with people in Asia, they would be taking off their shoes. It's pretty, I wouldn't say it's 100% normalized because there are a lot of global corporations that are working in Asia too, but people do take off their shoes often in the office.
Yeah, no, I'm all for it. I'm on team take off your shoes now. I used to not be and just be like, what's the point? And you have to wear nice socks now, no holes in them. But that's part of it too, how you present yourself to the world. But I found that really interesting and it stuck out. Michelle, what are three things you're hoping that readers will take away from reading the book?
I think that first to self-care. I
Mm.
think we often think about our health, our longevity, when we reach 40s, 50s, 60s. But I think, you can start today. In Korea, they start, teaching a lot of things really, really early. Babies at 6 months old are eating kimchi. The kimchi is
Mm.
part of their culture. There's 200 varieties, there's 400 different kinds of cabbages. Cabbage is really important. So it's the food literacy, it's learning about the different produce, but also eating it too. I think we can start today with little steps. And the second thing is don't discount any of it. All of it's really important for your mind, body, soul. I think, sometimes we hear about, oh, and I used to do this too, like discounting, oh, yeah, don't take the bubble bath or, but if it helps you to de-stress, which now I understand is so important to manage, then it has made a big difference on your health. And if you can incorporate that very easily, sustainably into your practice every day, it becomes that much more important. I think the last thing is preserve the wisdom. I think there's so much beauty in new discoveries, new science as we move forward. That's how we advance as a civilization, but don't throw out the old wisdom. I think what I found so amazing is that when you go back into these really old documents, you will see that they started taking, the first medicines were these things that were growing around them, and they were taking notes, copious notes about it, and they still hold true today. We've just forgotten to use them.
That's it. And 70% of all the pharmaceutical drugs are just synthetic versions of what we found in nature, right? That's where it all started, whether it's penicillin or all these others. That's the beauty of it. So we can really look to the past to help drive us into the future without giving up on science and technology, just melding. It's not an either or, it can be both.
Exactly.
Now, really quick before I let you go, you're part of the 5 a.m. club. I understand you're up at 5 every morning. Is that something you'd recommend for everyone? I mean, I read Robin Sharma's 5 a.m. and I tried it for like a month, and I'm a 6 a.m. club person myself, but you got to be pretty dedicated to do 5 a.m. every day, right?
Honestly, I think it's about your own rhythm. I think
Yeah.
they're night owls and they start, becoming alive at night. For me, it's about, finding that window of energy. So 5 a.m. is when I can have some time for myself to be thoughtful and intentional about how I'm going to start the day. It also allows me to have my yoga practice in the morning. So I do hot yoga. So I'm sweating, I'm using weights in there. It's a 30-minute session. And then the only other thing that I do, and I've never felt better, are the steps. Truly, it really is
Mm.
that simple. So 5 a.m. is my way of, gaining the time and also kind of having an earlier dinner, which has been working for me because I find that if I eat too close to bedtime. And I found this out by journaling and just kind of being more intentional. I don't journal every day about my food. It's just that period of time when I was recovering. I noticed a pattern that, if I ate too close to sleeping, I was actually using too much energy to digest and not sleeping restfully. So for me, the 5 a.m. is a way to kind of and I don't get it done all the time. Sometimes I have really late things and but when I do get that sort of morning practice in, it just really sets me up for the rest of the day.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't agree more that people need to look at when they're eating, not just what, right? Because if you're eating very healthy and it's midnight, you're going to sleep right afterwards, it's not a good, healthy thing for digestion. So
Yeah.
look at how and what and when you're eating also. So
And
I'm
what you're
totally on
doing
board.
to an empty stomach. I think that's one of the key things too.
Absolutely. Michelle, where can people pick up the book number one, learn more about you, connect with you?
I've been fortunate to get 5 book deals across the world, so it's everywhere before launch. So my launch date is on February 25th, and you can find it on Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, your favorite independent bookstore. It's been translated to German, Italian, Spanish. And I am speaking at organizations like Google and going to Hong Kong next after New York. So where you can find me, I'm most active on Instagram, michelle.jungmin.bang. I'm starting to use my middle name, which is very long. It makes my handle very long, but it just is a way for me to reconnect with, who I am, what I grew up with.
Well, thank you so much and congratulations. It really is an amazing book. I resonated with so much. It felt, just like truth was kind of coming through your words, even though I didn't understand many of the Korean words. It's okay. You don't need to understand. It's the vibration essence of it that I really got that. And you explained it so well. So congratulations to everyone listening. Go out and get that book. It's wonderful, Sun and Ssukgat. So thank you so much for coming on and all the best to you.
Thank you.
And again, if you want to check out Michelle's website, that's michellebang.com. Her Instagram is michelle.jungmin. That's JUNGMIN.bang. And we'll also include all these links in the show notes. Until next time, continue writing your own healing story.